Guruji, from my recollection from the last Saturday's class, you had asked a question to all of us, and I think we have to come to this question to answer it, and you told us to think about it. And I think the question was, it is easier to remain objective in moments of grief than being objective in moments of joy and ecstasy. And why is that the case? I think if I recollect, I think we have to come to this question to answer it from my understanding for this week. Sorry.
No, you are no. In fact, glad you did. All these people are very quiet about the homework. You know, you're very right. The question we gave was, how did you, can you please repeat it?
It is easier to remain objective in moments of grief than being objective in moments of joy and ecstasy. Why is that?
It is relatively easier to be objective in moments of grief than in moments of joy or happiness or ecstasy. Why is it? Any answer, any comments, Harish?
What comes to my mind is because joy is and happiness is our natural state. So there is nothing to remain objective per se, because it's our natural state. Joy is our natural being. So when we experience grief and sorrow, it is an unnatural state for us. So it takes us inward to understand why this unnatural state of being has happened to us. That's what I can understand from that.
See, in the context, when you say it is difficult to be objective in moments of joy or happiness, it is not the same as a state of mental peace. You know, when somebody is in a joyous moment of an occasion of, let's say there is a marriage in the family, or there's something that excites you about, that excitement is not the mental equanimity of peace and happiness we're talking about. That is also an emotion riding high. So it is the crests and the troughs. If you can imagine the crests and the troughs. Harish, I'll have to mute you because there's a lot of disturbance from your end, please. Okay. Who is doing it? The moment there is something, please mute that concern so that it doesn't disturb the whole concentration of the class. So what I was trying to say is there is the crests and the troughs, as we note in a wave, the high and the low points. If you were to say the high point is the moments of joy or ecstasy, the low points is the moments of grief or sorrow. Now, both these extreme points cause mental imbalance, isn't it? They cause mental agitation. So when you say that the moment of joy or ecstasy is our natural state, it is not to be compared to a natural state. Our natural state is perhaps the medium in between the crests and the troughs. In between the crests and troughs, there is the medium. That is that state of mental balance or composure or peace or happiness. So the question still stands. Why is it difficult to objective in moments of joy than moments of grief or sorrow? Yes, Vaidyanathanji.
When we are in moments of joy and happiness, our mind is accepting it. We are not challenging it. We are not questioning it. And therefore, we go with the flow. We are not necessarily detaching ourselves from the situation and looking at it objectively. When it's in a moment of grief or sorrow, our mind questions all the time as to why this is happening to me, and then we start examining it. Therefore, a certain level of objectivity descends when you are in sorrow or grief, whereas when you're happy, joyous, your hormones are flying high, and you are accepting that state and not necessarily challenging, why am I happy today? Why am I so glad today? You don't question that too often. You simply say, I'm happy, so you take it for granted. When you're sorry, or when you're unhappy and in grief, that's a very unnatural state for you. So you say, why am I unhappy? And therefore, you start objectively analyzing the situation as to why you are in that state, and not, as you say, in the median state where you're neither too happy nor too unhappy.
So you give a little attribute to the hormones, sir. Parvala. We'll accept that. Okay, right. Okay. You have a point there. True. Yes, Siddharamanji. Sir, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hari Om Guruji. When you are in joy, the ego crops up. You feel this is the achievement of yours. In grief, you try to surrender, because you start praying. That's the time only you think of the higher force. In joy, in achievements, you always think it is me who has achieved.
That's a very beautiful point. I would have not thought that way. It's very interesting. So the point Setuji is saying is, in moments of grief, no, it's not something which comes very naturally, though. You need to cultivate it, that in moments of grief, you, as Vaidyanathanji also said, you question and perhaps you wonder why. And when you are helpless, you do surrender. That's perhaps the most philosophical moment that could come, that, you surrender and you gracefully accept things. So you're able to perhaps rationalize and philosophize. But in moments of joy, as Sidhuji says, it boosts your ego, it inflates you. So you're almost swept away. The force is too powerful to reckon. You don't have the philosophical strength to how you philosophize grief. You may not be able to philosophize moments of joy or ecstasy or success and then come to terms with it or handle that moment. So there is a very valid point. Yes, beautiful, sir. Hariji.
During the moments of happiness, when my greed comes out, I want more. I want to be more happy. Whereas during the time of unhappiness or agitation, negative agitation, I would like to come out of it and I would like to avoid.
Yeah, it is. It's true. It is true. Yes. Correct, Ji. Shivaji rightly puts it, vichara starts in grief. Vichara means thinking, starts in grief. Jama sent a message that she said that in joy, the intellect is absent. Yes. RPG, any idea? Why is it easier to handle failure than success?
I think it aligns closely. Hari Om Guruji. I think it aligns closely with what others have said. I think we neglect, we forget that anywhere along that sine curve, that continuum, that the ultimate responsibility falls on the self, right? That everything that happens you know, when we're down on the lower end of, as you said, in the trough, we oh, you know, there's a God and there's the, you know, there's all these things. But then when we reach that zenith, right, that we forget, we don't attribute that success, that happiness to the ultimate source, the consciousness. So we just set that aside. So even someone that is further along, clearly not far enough, and they, you know, brand new child, grandchild, car, home, whatever, they forget that no, all of that is, the foundation is the self. And that individual that remembers along that entire continuum, they've reached somewhere.
Yes. No, you have a point. Yes. We fail to attune, we lose that sense of objectivity. Experience has proven time and again. Yeah, you're right. Roshni? Okay. Rajima, I'm trying to do so. Yeah, Roshni, if you can give it a try now.
Oh,
Perfect.
okay.
Right.
I was just thinking maybe it's because grief feels more external, so it's easier to blame it on our environment, surroundings, the world, while happiness and joy and things like that, we want to feel that that is more internal, so it feels more natural. So in that sense, because of that, it's easier to blame external factors for our grief, and we feel pride in the fact that we are happy about something or feel joy because of something, and so we hold on to that more than we hold on to our grief.
But something, but you know, Roshni, still be with you. Our Rajima, please don't do it. I'm trying to do it, please. So, you know, from a philosophical perspective, our natural state is to be a witness or to be objective. That's our natural state. So the moment you get involved or you're affected, it is not our natural state. Now, there is an element of what you're saying is to what Harish, when he first said that happiness is more of a natural state, but the kind of ecstasy and joy we are talking about of the crests, the higher points of joy or ecstatic moments, it is not that of our natural state. The natural state is the medium. So when you say because happiness is a natural state, it is not that same natural state we are talking about. So we need to draw a difference between moments where something meets our ego or satisfies us, we feel good about it. If success comes your way, you feel elated about it. This is not a natural moment. A natural state is where you remain unaffected by success or failure, by praise or censure, by profit or loss, by birth or death. You remain unaffected. That is our natural state. I'm trying to repeat it because a few comments have come that happiness is a natural state, which is not what we're talking about. When we talk in the question, why are we not objective in moments of joy or ecstasy? We're not referring to our natural state. We are referring to moments of success, as Sidhuji said, when something meets our ego. We are not objective, and we don't understand. What do we don't understand? That it is impermanent, isn't it? We don't understand that success is not permanent. There will be moments where there will be no success. It will pass away. So that lack of understanding that joy is not permanent is objectivity. To bring clarity to being objective, objectivity to understand that it is not permanent, it will pass. Therefore, I will not get swayed by success, nor will I be swayed by failure, because success is not permanent, nor failure is permanent. I need to be balanced in both these extremities. Isn't it, Roshni?
Yes.
That natural attitude you should have to these two extremities of life is different to the concept of what natural is, what a few comments came by. So I'm trying to explain so that we get that. We don't mix up these two, even though we may use the same term happiness, but they are not two same states.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yes. Harishji. You have to mute yourself, please.
Hari Om Guruji.
Yes, we can hear you.
I just wanted to say something which others have echoed, but slightly in a different way, that that happiness and sorrow lie in the, we perceive that it lies outside us, in the objects and the emotions and thought, whatever is outside us. Now, you also said that it's very difficult, or it's more difficult to identify with what is inside versus what is outside. So when in moments of happiness, we find it easier to attach ourselves or identify with the outside and consider that that is the end of the world, right? And therefore it is easier to be objective when you don't identify with it, which is when you're in sorrow. So basically it comes down to you get attached to that, the objects or what is outside, and therefore you find it difficult because to be objective. Once you are attached, you become difficult to be objective.
Correct. No, I think you made a very beautiful point. I don't know whether you all have caught what he said. Joy and sorrow are attributes of the external world. That is the nature of the world. The nature of the world is dvandvas. The nature of the world is to present itself with opposites. At every level of your personality, there are opposites. At the material level, there is profit, loss, heat, cold, love and hatred, acceptance and rejectance. This is the world. So the world gives you these opposites. So when you say joy and sorrow or happiness and grief, these are the opposites of the world. This is the nature of the world. Now, to remain objective or detached is the quality or an attribute which is inward. It has nothing to do with the outside world. You must separate the two. So the fluctuations of the extremities, or the fluctuations or the extremities which are applicable at all levels of the personality, whether material, physical, emotional, intellectual, are happening at the external level. But the ability to relate to that is an internal quality, an internal attribute. And that capacity, where do you draw that capacity from? I remember asking that question. Where do you draw that capacity from? Now, before I get to that, I think Tirupati wanted to say something. He drew my attention. Tirupati, are you there? Yes, Tirupati.
Can you hear?
Yes,
Yeah.
can hear you.
No, I was thinking from the fall of the ladder of fall thought that when you have a vasana, then it comes as a thought, and after that there's a desire, and that's where the branch happens, where you get the object of desire, you are in the joy, and then you don't get the object of desire, then you are in the grief and all the other anger and all the other emotions, the sadgunas coming in. So in that branch, it's both are away from the original state of happiness that everybody is talking about is distinct. So we are talking about this branch that's happening when you are getting the object of desire, you are happy. You're not getting the object of desire, you are in a grief. So separating this in relative sense, why is that intellect is functioning at a different level at a joy and grief is the question that we are talking about. And then in a relative sense, even though it is a fall from the original state, but on the joy, you are closer to the object of desire relatively compared to not getting it. So you lose, in relative sense, you lose the relative objectivity in that lower level of branch. I just wanted to highlight that point. The proximity to the object of desire in relative sense.
Big mathematical explanation, huh?
Yeah, the process flow.
I don't know whether you followed what Tirupati said. He's drawing to the ladder of fall. In the ladder of fall, as you all are aware, it starts from a thought desire, a thought attachment desire, and then when your desire is met, you have a series of emotions. For example, there is greed, there's envy, there's etc. But when a desire is met, you're happy relatively. When a desire is unmet, you're unhappy. So let's say you have 20 units of intellect. Given the 20 units of intellect, when you measure it with sorrow, how the intellect reacts, the same 20 units of intellect, when you deal with happiness, how does it react? What Tirupati is saying is, because you're closer to the object of enjoyment, the intellect loses its ability to process it and accept it. It loses its realistic sense, it loses its wisdom. But when it comes to the object, when it's not fulfilled, since you're further away, there's some kind of wisdom that comes up. Now, I don't know why you're attributing to the object there.
Yeah, it is. We are attached. The attribution is actually more of attachment. You're more attached. So the 20 units of intellect just now, even though we have at that level, we are losing it. Maybe you're just having a 5 units of it in the moment of joy. Maybe you have more because you don't get the object of desire.
Yeah, just going along with the flow, I agree with you, and I appreciate your thought process. It's like, if I can take an example of a swimmer can swim across, or let's say in a swimming pool, effortlessly, he or she could swim. But the same swimmer is, if he is expected to swim across a strong current of water, across a river, let's say, he'll find it that much more challenging because he's only operating with that much of strength or efficiency. But with the strong current against him, it'll be difficult for him to sail through effortlessly. He'll have to put in extra effort, but which he doesn't have. So he'll be swept away with the current. If you take that example, the thought flow, when joy or moments of ecstasy, it actually is more powerful. You don't, with your existing intellect, you don't stand a chance. And the reason is because you develop an attachment to joy. You have developed a detachment to sorrow, because something which is not acceptable to you, you want to detach yourself from it. You don't want to do anything with it. So perhaps you are negating it. Therefore, inwardly, there is a philosophical approach that you have got nothing to do with it, because you are rejecting sorrow. But when it comes to joy, you're mentally attaching yourself to it. And since you're attaching yourself to it, the mind is more strong at those moments. Intellectual clarity doesn't help to understand that it is also ephemeral. It is also passing and fleeting. So you get affected. Now the question, before I get to that, Reddy Garu, all okay?
Pranam,
Yes,
Guruji.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, perfectly read, Guruji. But here I'm just correlating with conventional practices where strategy has been put in place and we have been successful. So like we're talking about the pleasure and joy which is coming across. And where the strategy is failed, and immediately we get into the objectivity of root cause analysis, RCA. We put that practice in place, why we went wrong, where we went wrong, how we went wrong. I think the more amount of energies goes through in fault finding or root cause analysis. I'm just correlating the conversations, what has been happening. I think it truly reflecting here. When really we succeeded in particular target or objective, I don't think we do the root cause analysis. People are absolutely exuberant and they're in the world and that they achieved the goal, and they don't understand the lean back on why, how we achieved it and what. I don't think we have a time to brainstorm that activities. But the moment that failure takes place, I think the whole world comes to one place and start analyzing each and every aspect from the management perspective or the day-to-day activities perspective. I think this analogy is perfectly aligning there.
Yeah,
that's my observation.
Yeah, the term RCA is very apt here. The root cause analysis. Huh?
That's right.
Interesting. Yes, very true. Very true. Now, what we further need to note is where does one get the strength of becoming objective? Or how does one enhance this quality of becoming objective? Or let me even put it this way. Where does that strength of being objective or witness comes from? Where does it come from? I'm intentionally not coining the question in little, I'm questioning it with less clarity. The question is, where does the strength of being objective or witness come from? If you say it is the quality of the intellect, but then you should also be objective to praise and censure, no? Somebody praises you, somebody challenges you. Is it not at the intellectual level? If objectivity is an attribute of intellect, then how do you explain the fluctuations at the intellectual level? Arrogance and no arrogance. Somebody feeds your ego and somebody doesn't feed you or challenges your ego. Then how do you handle the fluctuation at that level? Amitama, you're following? The intellect also is subjected to fluctuations. And how do you ensure that you remain objective to the intellectual fluctuations? If you say objectivity is a quality of the intellect, in fact, it's that intellect that remains objective. But then where does that get its strength from? Is the question, Amitama.
Yeah, so there will be fluctuations and there will be times when you lose your focus and that awareness on being focused on self, and always correcting yourself to make sure that you don't get wayward and keep going back to that intellect and being objective, remaining steadfast on self.
So the strength comes from
that focus.
On what?
Remaining focused on the ultimate, which is the self.
I give you 100 marks for the answer, but you need to explain how is it that intellect gets the strength by focusing on the self. The answer is right. The strength of objectivity and witness, the intellect borrows the quality from the self. So it is not a natural quality of the intellect. It is that which it gains from the self.
Mhm.
You're right. If your intellect, so what is the process that that facilitates this?
I guess it's a series of things, things like contemplations, things like the daily habits that we inculcate, the morning 4 to 6, for example, that clarity that you continue to develop so that you do not get distracted in times of joy or in times of sorrow. Consciousness.
Yeah. In fact, you all are making absolute sense and is resonating with what we are trying to get. See, the absolute witness, something in us which is a witness to the world, the body, the mind, and intellect is the Atman. So the Atman is a true witness. So when I identify with the self, which is the nature of the self, the nature of the self is to be objective, it's to be a witness. So when the intellect identifies with the self, the law of attachment kicks in. Roshni, you know what's the law of attachment?
In what sense, I guess?
The law of attachment is the law of becoming. The law of attachment is when you allow your thoughts to ponder on something, you identify yourself with it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When you identify something with it, with something, you become it. So the law of attachment is said to be as your thoughts, so you become. As you think, so you become. So if I use my intellect to contemplate on the higher thoughts, to contemplate on the higher knowledge, to contemplate on the self, what would be the end product of that?
You are the self.
You become the self. Now, when you become the self, let's say you become 30% of the self. So you will start exhibiting the qualities of the self, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the context, what is the quality of the self?
To be objective.
To be objective, the Atman in you, the Atman in me, the self in you, the self in me is a pure witness to everything that's happening. So the self in you has nothing to do with what perceptions you perceive. The self in you has no interest in what actions you perpetrate. The self in you has no interest in what emotions you feel, good or bad. The self in you has no interest whether you're learning Kenopanishad or you're reading something rubbish. The Atman in you, the Atman in you, it just enlivens all this, has got nothing to do with it. So the Atman in us is a witness 100% to this. But the only way I can gain the nature of the self in me is by shifting my focus and attention onto the self. From the I shift to the self. When I shift my thoughts and attention from the lower to the higher to the self, I gain the attributes of the self. And by gaining the attributes of it, I'm able to live the qualities in my life. So to the extent I do the vichara, which is reflection and contemplation on the self, I become that which I identify. So I practice that quality in my day-to-day life. So the intellect gains that strength or that objectivity because it is borrowing the quality of the self. Otherwise, it is the very nature of the intellect also to be fluctuated. The intellect doesn't become wise with worldly knowledge. Remember this. When you only have worldly information, it doesn't become wise. RPG, what happens with the worldly information?
You know, to say that it changes, I guess it's true, but it again is impermanent. It's not that which takes your focus away to the self. You continue, you know, you're using your intellect to drive home or to continue to contemplate on the world, not on the self. So you get caught up in that as well. Again, perhaps at a higher level than, you know, feeling and the like, but still you're kind of stuck there. You don't go any further.
So just because you have ideas, you may be informative, you may have the knowledge, but that knowledge is not necessarily wisdom, isn't it? Here we are saying wisdom is to be objective or witness. So I'm differentiating when we say objectivity is a quality of the intellect. Many a time we very easily passingly say it's the intellect that's objective, but where does intellect get its objectivity from? It is from the self. So it is that spiritual quality that expresses through the intellect, but it's not a quality of the intellect. It is a quality of the self. If it is a quality of the intellect, the most brilliant scientist who is so brilliant than you and me should be 100% more objective or witness, isn't it? I can be a brilliant scientist, but I can lose my temper at drop of a hat. I have no control over my petty instincts. I could be addicted to something. I can be addicted to my tongue. I have no control over my tongue, but I'm a very established scientist, world-renowned scientist. No control over my tongue. What are we talking? They're two blowing hot and cold, isn't it? Mm. So you got to understand. Gayatri Ma, can we have that third diagram again, please? So you'll understand what the verse is saying. The verse is saying you've got to shift your focus and attention. The next one, please. You've got to shift the focus and attention from the right to the left. The real source of objectivity comes from the consciousness. The nature of consciousness is it is that changeless. So if you want to remain unaffected, which is relatively changeless, when the change happens, what is the change happening? Change happening at the material level, profit and loss, change happening at the physical level, heat and cold, health and ill health, change happening at the emotional level, joy and sorrow, change happening intellectual level, accept and rejectance. How do I remain changeless in the change? The verse is saying, Shrotrasya Shrotram. Shift your attention from the small ear to the capital ear. Now, how do I do that? Try to practice objectivity. How do I practice objectivity? Shift your focus onto the capital. So it's almost catch-22 situation here. Only when you become objective, you'll be able to shift your attention onto the self. So withdraw from the perception, action, emotion, thought, get to the self. The more extroverted you go, the more you'll be swept away by the perceptions, actions, emotions, thoughts. The more you come inward, there's a fair chance of you being able to become an observer to these happenings. You become an observer. And now, Shah Suresh, you've been an observer today. Are you following?
Yes, Guruji.
To be an observer, huh? So it's a quality of introvertedness. So when you go introverted, what you're doing is you're identifying with the self and not the outer. So it becomes the path, it is the goal. So the wise are completely freed and risen above this world. They have attained immortality. The absolute sense is immortality. And another factor, I think Vaidyanathan ji had commented, that other factor which is other than the world and other than the self, which helps us is the conscience. So you don't gain the strength of objectivity, but you will be able to examine, if I'm looking at a certain perception, and am I doing the right thing? The conscience tells you, okay, you're not doing the right thing. If I'm violating my austerity of speech, sometimes the best way to communicate is to not say anything. You must be silent, isn't it? And when you violate that austerity of speech, something in me tells me, I think rather not say anything. It's the best to keep quiet. So at different moments, the conscience gives you an assurance this is the right thing or not. But it may not help you to strengthen your thing, but just to give you an assurance, yes, you're right. So conscience also could be a very important factor that could help you not get influenced by a perception, like you're with a certain company of friends. Something inward tells you, I don't think I should be with these people. So there's a fair chance you don't influenced by that perception, isn't it? Sitaramji.
I have slight difficulty in understanding when it was mentioned that it's easier to be objective when we are in grief rather than success. I find that in both cases it's difficult to be objective. When you are in grief or when you have been unsuccessful, it's very easy to pass it off as somebody else's failure and not your own. And in success, you want to take it all for yourself. So in both cases, objectivity is lost. I think objectivity, in my view, is something that if you are objective, you would be objective in both cases, which comes through what you just mentioned, through contemplation, through looking at the consciousness and saying that this is something which is transient, etc. That will bring objectivity. Otherwise, I think in both situations of grief or this thing, you are equally not objective.
No, it is certainly not easy. We're not making it any easier by saying it's easier to be objective in moments of grief or sorrow. We're not making it easy. We're only saying relatively. If you compare moments of grief and moments of ecstasy, it is relatively easier to be objective in moments of grief than moments of sorrow. That doesn't mean it's easy to be objective. No, it takes a lot of intellectual strength and spiritual maturity to be objective and say, I've got nothing to do with it. When there's a terrible loss in business, to carry on producing without being affected by that loss, it takes maturity. A sportsman, when he's not being selected, when he has got series of failures, it takes a lot of objectivity and maturity to continue performing, to keep doing his part without getting the result to affect him, the result of his failures. It is never easy. Now, we're not making it any easy by saying so, but one needs to, in fact, this is one of the perhaps the important reasons why the verse says, you know, the Gita. What is that verse in the Gita which says, Karmani eva adhikara, karmanye vadhikaraste va phaleshu kadachana. A simple innocuous line seals it. This is Karma Yoga. Action. The accent is on action. Karmani eva adhikara. Your right is in action only. Ma phaleshu kadachana. Renounce the fruits of action. Fruits do not belong to you. Oh, then why am I doing all this? Yeah, your job is only with doing the action, man. Don't worry if fruits doesn't belong to me or not. Just do your part. Oh, am I not doing for the fruits? Yeah, you will get the fruits, but don't be too overly mindful of the fruits. Just do your part. Do your karma, do your action. If your accent is on action and not the fruits, you will not be affected either by success or failure. But if you are result oriented all the time, then the fruits will either inspire you or demotivate you. When the question is, I want you to think and come back with an answer. When is it that fruits of action either motivate you or demotivate you? Hariji, something wrong in the question, huh? Because I was concerned with your expression. All okay? Question is, when do the fruits of action either motivate you or demotivate you? Now, and think in lines in the context of the verse I said, which is karmanye vahadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Now we find ourselves constantly, the fruits of action either excite us or demotivate us, isn't it? Reddy Garu, am I right? The fruits of action terribly influence our ability to do things.
Yes, perfectly right, Guruji. We always.
So the question is, could you repeat the questions for everyone just to be sure?
When is the fruits of action motivates you or demotivates you?
When does fruit of action actually motivate you or demotivate you? If you're able to get this right, I tell you, you have got the right principle. You've got the bull by the horns. You've got the principle which governs action. Then doesn't matter. Success or failure is immaterial to you. It should be material. Then what should matter? Let's wait for the answers. Please think about it. And somebody must be assigned to remind us of these questions. It's not that suddenly somebody remembers midway during the class, oh, yo, Guruji, you gave a question.